The color of my existence was a particular shade of gray, the hue of dust on a forgotten book, of rain on a slate roof, of the time just before dawn when the world has not yet decided to be. I did not move through rooms. I haunted their edges, a peripheral blur my family had long since learned to look through. To be invisible was a kind of safety, a fragile peace I had cultivated, but it was a peace paid for with the slow erosion of my own soul. Tonight, that fragile peace was set to shatter. "Eleonora, you will assist the staff tonight," my Aunt Matilda had said, her voice dripping with the false sweetness she reserved for her cruelest commands. "The Duke's housekeeper has fallen ill, and it would be a shame for his grand dinner to be marred by slow service. It is the least we can do to show our support for our new neighbor." It was, of course, a lie. Mrs. Gable, the Duke's housekeeper, was as robust as the ancient oaks lining his drive. The lie was the point. It was not enough for me to be ignored. I had to be actively humbled, turned into a servant in the very house where my uncle and aunt were to be honored guests. My cousin Clara, her beauty a dazzling counterpoint to my quiet plainness, had looked at me with a flicker of pity, but she said nothing. Pity was a coin she often spent, but she never had the courage to back it with the gold of action. My uncle, her father, and my guardian had simply studied the pattern on the rug, his silence a familiar, heavy blanket that smothered any hope of protest. He was a man who had traded his spine for a quiet life, and my dignity was a small price for him to pay. So I found myself in a simple black dress, an apron tied tight around my waist, my hair pulled back in a severe knot that made my face feel stark and exposed. But the final humiliation was the one clasped around my throat. As I was about to leave our rooms, my aunt had stopped me, a small, velvet box in her hand. "One cannot look entirely like a scullery maid," she had murmured, her fingers cold as she fastened the clasp. "This will lend you an air of borrowed dignity." A string of pearls, heavy and cool against my skin. They were luminous, each one a perfect, milky globe that seemed to glow with its own internal light. I knew I should not wear them. They felt like a brand, a beautiful shackle. But to argue was to invite a scene, a storm of fury that would only end with me wearing the pearls anyway, my face streaked with tears. So I had bowed my head in acquiescence, the weight of the gems a physical manifestation of my subjugation. Now, in the grand dining hall of Blackwood Manor, the weight felt crushing. The room was a symphony of gold and crystal, the candlelight dancing on polished silver and gleaming mahogany. Laughter and conversation swelled and receded like a tide, a sea of noise in which I was meant to drown. I moved with practiced unobtrusiveness, refilling wine glasses, clearing plates, my gaze fixed on my tasks. I did not look at my family, seated near the head of the table, my aunt preening under the warm glow of social success. I did not look at the other guests, and I certainly did not look at the Duke. Duke Alaric, the master of this domain, was a man carved from shadow and silence. He had arrived in the county 6 months ago, and rumor trailed him like a cloak. They said he was cold, severe, impossibly wealthy, and haunted by the tragic death of his mother years before. He rarely socialized, and this dinner was a shocking anomaly, an event that had set the local gentry into a frenzy. He sat at the head of the table, a still point in the swirling room. He did not speak much, but when he did, his voice was low and precise, cutting through the chatter like a razor. I felt his eyes on me once or twice, a brief, penetrating gaze that I dismissed as my own nervous imagination. He was looking at a servant, nothing more. I was carrying a heavy silver platter of roasted fowl when the tide of conversation suddenly receded, leaving a pocket of startling silence. I felt a change in the room's atmosphere, a sudden tension. And then, the voice, calm and clear, but carrying the unmistakable ring of absolute authority. "Why is she serving dinner in my mother's pearls?" The question was not directed at me, but it struck me like a physical blow. The platter in my hands trembled. Every eye in the room swiveled, first to the Duke, then to me. I was pinned by their collective gaze, no longer invisible, but horrifyingly, incandescently visible. The pearls around my neck felt as if they were on fire, searing my skin. I saw my aunt's face, a mask of practiced charm crumbling into stark, chalky terror. Her mouth opened, a small, soundless gasp. The Duke's eyes, the color of a winter storm, were fixed on her. He had not raised his voice. He did not need to. The quiet power in that simple question was enough to strip the air from the room. He waited. My aunt, for the first time since I had known her, was utterly undone. Her social armor, so polished and impenetrable, had been pierced. Without a word, she pushed her chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. She rose, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, and with one last panicked glance at the Duke, she fled the room. A duchess in the making did not run, but a cornered thief did. The silence she left behind was profound. My uncle stared after her, his face slack with a mixture of confusion and fear. Clara looked at me, her blue eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. I stood frozen, the heavy platter a leaden weight in my arms, the pearls a circlet of ice and fire at my throat. I was exposed, implicated, and utterly alone. A footman, trained for any crisis, smoothly took the platter from my trembling hands before I could drop it. The Duke's gaze shifted from the empty doorway to me. It was not angry, it was analytical. He was looking at me as if I were a complex puzzle he was determined to solve. "You will come to my library," he said. It was not a request. He rose from his chair, his tall frame commanding the space, and without a backward glance at his stunned guests, he walked out of the dining hall, leaving me to follow in the wake of his silent, devastating power. The walk to the library was the longest of my life. The rich carpets muffled my footsteps, but my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was a servant caught wearing stolen jewels. Even if my aunt had forced them upon me, who would believe such a tale? I was the poor relation, the convenient scapegoat. My life, already so small and constrained, was about to shrink to the size of a prison cell. I imagined the disgrace, the whispers, the final, irrevocable casting out. The Duke's library was a sanctuary of knowledge and shadow. Books climbed the walls from floor to ceiling, their leather spines forming a rich tapestry of russet and gold. The air smelled of old paper, beeswax, and rain. He stood by the massive stone fireplace, where a low fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across his severe, handsome face. He gestured to a worn leather chair opposite his own. "Sit," he commanded, his voice softer now that they were alone, but no less authoritative. I sat on the very edge of the cushion, my hands clenched in my lap, the pearls feeling like a hangman's noose. He did not sit down. Instead, he leaned against the mantelpiece, studying me with that same unnerving intensity. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I expected an interrogation, accusations, a cold dismissal. What I did not expect was the quiet, almost gentle question he finally asked. "Tell me your name." "Eleonora," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Eleonora Vance." "Eleonora," he repeated, testing the sound of it. "And how did you come to be wearing my mother's pearls, Eleonora Vance?" I took a shaky breath, the truth my only possible shield, however flimsy. "My aunt, Matilda Croft, she insisted I wear them. She said it would lend me dignity." The word sounded feeble even to my own ears, a child's excuse. He watched my face, his gaze missing nothing. "She gave them to you tonight?" "Yes, Your Grace, just before we left for the manor." "And you did not think it strange that your aunt would possess a necklace that once belonged to the late Duchess?" A cold dread washed over me. I had assumed the pearls were merely expensive, a piece from my aunt's own collection. I had never imagined this. "I did not know they were hers, Your Grace. I swear it. I had never seen them before." My voice gained a shred of strength from the horror of the realization. This was not just humiliation, it was a calculated theft, and I was the unwitting mule. He seemed to accept this, a slight nod his only confirmation. He fell silent again, his eyes drifting from my face to the window, where the night pressed against the glass. I braced myself for the next logical step. He would call for the constable. Instead, he changed the subject so abruptly it left me reeling. "Last Tuesday," he said, his voice now musing, reflective, "I was riding near the old parish church in the village. I saw a young woman sitting on the lich gate, sketching the Norman archway. She was so absorbed in her work she did not notice my approach. She had a smudge of charcoal on her cheek." He turned his gaze back to me, and a slow, dawning comprehension warmed my chilled skin. Her sketchbook was filled with detailed drawings, cornices, buttresses, gargoyles, not the work of a casual artist, but of someone with a deep appreciation for form and structure. "That was you, was it not?" I could only nod, my throat tight. I remembered that afternoon. It had been a stolen hour of peace, the only time I felt truly myself, losing my gray invisibility in the solid, beautiful lines of old stone. It was my secret passion, the study of architecture, a world of logic and beauty I could escape into through the pages of borrowed books. "I recognized you the moment you entered the dining hall tonight," he continued, "even in that uniform. It was the way you hold yourself, a quiet stillness, an observant nature. The pearls were merely a jarring note in an otherwise coherent composition." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process his words. He had seen me, not as a servant, not as a poor relation, not as a blur at the edge of a room. He had seen me, the person I was when no one else was looking. He had remembered a detail as small as a charcoal smudge. The shock of it was more profound than the fear had been. To be truly seen, even for a moment, was a terrifying and exhilarating sensation. "My mother," he said, his voice dropping lower, a rough edge of old grief in it, "had a passion for architecture. She designed the west wing of this house herself. Those pearls were a gift from my father to celebrate its completion. They have not been out of their vault since her death." The pieces clicked into place. My aunt must have seen them on a previous visit, or heard of them, and somehow, through means I couldn't fathom, acquired them. Her greed and ambition had led her to commit a crime that was not just a theft of property, but a desecration of memory, and she had used me to do it. The Duke pushed himself away from the mantelpiece and walked over to a towering bookshelf. He ran a long finger along the spines before pulling out a heavy, leather-bound volume. He placed it on the large desk in the center of the room. "This is a collection of Palladio's original drawings," he said. "I believe you might find it of interest." I looked from the book to his face, utterly bewildered. We were not talking about theft or punishment or my aunt's disgraceful flight. We were talking about architecture. I felt a surge of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years, a fragile, tentative flicker of hope. It was so foreign a sensation it was almost painful. "Your Grace," I began, my voice trembling, "I don't understand." "You are not to blame for your aunt's avarice," he stated, as if it were the simplest fact in the world. "You were a tool in her scheme, but you are not a tool. You are the woman who sketches Norman arches with charcoal on her cheek." He paused, his gaze steady and direct. "My staff will see you home. A carriage will be sent for you tomorrow morning at 10. I would like to show you my mother's designs for the West Wing." He turned back to the fire, a clear dismissal. The interview was over. I rose, my legs unsteady, and curtsied clumsily. As I reached the door, I paused and unclasped the pearls. The cool, heavy weight left my hand. I turned and placed them reverently on the edge of his desk, next to the book of Palladio's drawings. "Thank you, Your Grace," I whispered, though the words felt inadequate to convey the monumental shift that had just occurred within me. He did not turn, but I heard him say, his voice low, 10 o'clock, Miss Vance." The carriage ride home was a silent, surreal dream. My uncle sat opposite me, his face pale and drawn, refusing to meet my eyes. The storm at our small rented house was epic, yet strangely muted. My aunt had locked herself in her room, and my uncle did not have the will to demand she face him. He simply wrung his hands and muttered about ruin and disgrace, his fear a selfish thing that had no room for my own ordeal. Clara, however, came to my room later that night. She stood in the doorway, her usual radiance dimmed by shame. "Eleonora, I am so sorry," she whispered. "I knew she was unkind to you, but I never imagined she was capable of something so wicked, using you like that." "It is not your fault, Clara," I said, and I found, to my surprise, that I meant it. Clara was a product of her mother's ambitions, a beautiful flower cultivated in a poisoned garden. She had never been taught to look beyond the surface of things. "The Duke," she said, her eyes wide with awe. "He defended you. He singled you out." I thought of his words. "You are not a tool. You are the woman who sketches Norman arches." He had not defended me so much as he had defined me. He had given me back a piece of myself I thought I had lost forever. I slept very little that night, my mind a whirlwind of fear and a strange, burgeoning excitement. I was terrified of what my aunt might do, but I was more terrified of letting this unexpected opportunity slip through my fingers. The Duke had opened a door into a world I had only ever dreamed of, a world of beautiful buildings and intelligent conversation. For the first time, I was determined not to let my aunt's shadow push me back into the gray. The next morning, the Duke's carriage arrived at precisely 10 o'clock, its glossy black lacquer and ducal crest causing a stir on our modest street. My aunt remained locked away, but my uncle saw me to the door, his expression a miserable cocktail of fear and envy. "Be careful, Eleonora," he mumbled. "Men like the Duke, they do not concern themselves with girls like you for no reason. Do not make things worse for this family." His warning was clear: do not get ideas above your station. Do not bring more trouble to his door. But as I settled against the plush velvet seats of the carriage, I felt a small, hard kernel of defiance solidify within me. My uncle's world was a cramped, fearful place. The Duke was offering a glimpse of something else entirely. I would not be careless, but I would not be afraid either. At the manor, I was not led to a side entrance, but through the grand front doors, where a stern-looking woman with iron-gray hair and a surprisingly kind smile greeted me. This, I knew, must be the very much not ill Mrs. Gable. "Miss Vance," she said with a respectful nod, "His Grace is expecting you in the solarium." The Duke was waiting for me, not in formal attire, but in a simple shirt and riding breeches. Sunlight streamed through the vast panes of glass, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and warming the stone floor. Rolled-up blueprints and architectural drawings were spread across a massive oak table. He looked up as I entered, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw something other than severity in his eyes. It was not a smile, not yet, but it was a softening, a lessening of the tension that always seemed to surround him. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Welcome. I trust your journey was comfortable." "It was, Your Grace. Thank you for sending for me." "Alaric," he corrected gently. "My name is Alaric." The offer of his given name was a profound gesture, an invitation to a different kind of relationship, one that transcended the vast social chasm between a duke and a penniless niece. I felt a blush creep up my neck. "Alaric," I repeated softly, "and I am Eleonora." For the next 2 hours, the world outside the solarium ceased to exist. He showed me his mother's drawings, and they were breathtaking. She had possessed not just talent, but genius. Her style was a bold fusion of classical symmetry and Gothic aspiration, creating spaces that were both grand and deeply personal. We spoke of line and proportion, of the way light could be used to shape a room, of the emotional resonance of a well-placed archway. I found my voice. The hesitant, quiet girl was replaced by someone articulate and passionate, someone who could debate the merits of a flying buttress and trace the influence of Vitruvius through the Renaissance. Alaric did not patronize me, he listened. He challenged my ideas and considered my observations with a seriousness no one had ever afforded me before. He saw my mind, and he treated it as the most valuable thing about me. It was intoxicating. She wanted to build a folly on the far hill, he said, his finger tracing a delicate watercolor sketch of a small Grecian-style temple. A place for reading, she never had the chance. His voice was tinged with that same sorrow I had heard the night before. This was the source of his pain, the ghost that haunted this beautiful house. "It's a perfect design," I said, studying the elegant lines. "It honors the landscape instead of imposing on it." "Yes," he said quietly, she understood that a building should be a conversation with its surroundings, not a monologue. In that moment, a bond was forged between us, a connection built not on flirtation or social maneuvering, but on a shared language, a mutual reverence for beauty and intellect. A deep, quiet understanding passed between us. We were two solitary people who had found in the other a rare and unexpected kinship. Occurrence. Twice a week, the Duke's carriage would arrive for me. We would spend our time in the library, or walking the grounds, or studying the manor's intricate architecture. Mrs. Gable always acted as a discreet chaperone, serving us tea and then vanishing, her quiet approval a comforting presence. With every conversation, the layers of my gray, invisible self peeled away, revealing someone I was only just beginning to recognize. I started to hold my head higher, to speak with more confidence. I was no longer a ghost in my own life. At home, the atmosphere was thick with resentment. My aunt had emerged from her room, her face a pinched mask of fury. She did not speak of the pearls or of the disastrous dinner party. The subject was a locked door between us, but she watched me with narrowed, hateful eyes. My growing confidence was an affront to her, the Duke's attention a threat she could not comprehend or control. She could not fathom that his interest in me was intellectual. In her world, women were either beautiful ornaments or strategic assets. An intelligent, plain woman like me was a useless anomaly, and the Duke's fascination with me must, in her mind, be some strange, perverse whim, one that was interfering with her own grand designs for Clara. One afternoon, as Alaric and I were examining the stonework of the chapel on his estate, our hands brushed as we both reached to trace the carving of a vine. His fingers closed gently over mine. The touch was brief, a fleeting moment of contact, but it sent a jolt through me, a warmth that spread from my hand all the way to my heart. I looked up at him, and his stormy gray eyes were fixed on me, his expression unreadable but intense. The severe lines of his face seemed to soften, and for the first time, I saw the man he might have been without his grief. Less of a duke and more of a man. He held my gaze for a moment longer than was proper, a silent question hanging in the air between us, before he slowly released my hand. Neither of us spoke of it, but something had shifted. The comfortable companionship between us was now charged with a new, unspoken electricity. That evening, my aunt was waiting for me. The moment I stepped through the door, she seized my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh like talons. "This charade is over," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "Do you think I am a fool? Do you think I don't know what you are doing, parading yourself in front of that man?" "I am doing nothing," I said, trying to pull my arm away, but her grip was like iron. "The Duke and I share an interest, that is all." She laughed, a short, ugly sound. "An interest? Men like him are not interested in girls like you. He is amusing himself with you, you pathetic little bookworm, and you are ruining everything. I have plans for Clara, important plans that involve the Duke's circle, and you are making us a laughingstock with your sordid little arrangement." Her cruelty was a familiar poison, but this time it did not wither me. I stood taller, meeting her furious gaze without flinching. "There is nothing sordid about it. Perhaps you simply cannot comprehend a relationship that is not based on manipulation and greed." The slap was so sudden I didn't see it coming. The force of it snapped my head to the side, my cheek stinging, the sharp crack echoing in the small hallway. For a moment, there was only a ringing in my ears and the hot, metallic taste of blood in my mouth where my teeth had cut my lip. "You ungrateful wretch," she snarled, her face contorted with rage. "After all I have done for you, taking you in when you had nowhere else to go, I will not have you destroy this family's future." She released me, her chest heaving. "I have made arrangements. You are to be married. Mr. Cole, the farmer from Redding Creek. He is a coarse man, but respectable enough, and he is willing to take you without a dowry. It is more than you deserve. The wedding will be in 2 weeks. That will put an end to your weekly excursions and your grand delusions." The words hit me like stones. Mr. Cole was a brutish, leering man twice my age, known for his heavy hand and heavier drinking. The thought of being bound to him was a fate worse than any prison. It was a complete and utter annihilation of the person I was becoming. "No," I said, the word a small, firm sound in the charged silence. "It is not your choice to make," she retorted. "I am your guardian. It is settled." She turned and swept away, leaving me trembling in the hallway, the sting on my cheek a pale fire compared to the icy terror that was flooding my veins. This was her final move, her checkmate. She would not just remove me from the Duke's orbit, she would bury me alive where no one would ever see me or hear from me again. The next day, a letter arrived for the Duke. I knew with a sickening certainty that it was from my aunt. It would be filled with lies, poison designed to corroborate her actions, to paint me as unstable, unworthy, a problem she was solving with a sensible marriage. She was severing the connection, burning the bridge he had so carefully built for me. Despair, cold and absolute, began to settle over me. I had been given a glimpse of the sun, only to be plunged back into a deeper, more permanent darkness. 2 days passed in agonizing silence. The Duke's carriage did not come. My aunt was smug, her victory assured. She bustled about, making wedding arrangements with a grim satisfaction, while my uncle retreated further into his study, abdicating all responsibility. I felt myself shrinking again, the gray seeping back into the edges of my world. Hope was a fool's luxury, and I had been the greatest fool of all to indulge in it. On the 3rd day, a formal summons arrived. It was not for me. It was for my aunt and uncle, requesting their presence at Blackwood Manor that afternoon to discuss a matter of some urgency. A separate, smaller note was enclosed for me. It contained only 3 words. "Trust me, Alaric." The small slip of paper felt like a lifeline. I clung to it, reading the words over and over. It was a fragile shield against the suffocating despair, but it was something. When my aunt and uncle departed for the manor, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and, on my aunt's part, triumphant curiosity. I waited, my entire future hanging in the balance. When they returned hours later, they were transformed. My uncle looked pale and shaken, as if he had aged a decade. My aunt was utterly broken. Her face was ashen, her eyes hollowed out. The iron core of her personality seemed to have dissolved, leaving behind a brittle, crumbling shell. She stumbled into the house and went straight to her room without a word, the door closing with a sound of finality. Clara found me in the parlor, her own face streaked with tears, but her eyes were clear. "He knows," she whispered, her voice filled with a terrible awe. "He knows everything." She told me what had happened. They had been shown into the Duke's library, the same room where my own fate had turned weeks before. I was already there, standing by the fire, Alaric beside me. He had not offered them a seat. He stood before them, a figure of implacable justice, and he had calmly, systematically dismantled my aunt's entire world. He began with the letter she had sent him, a vicious screed accusing me of mental instability, of delusions of grandeur, of being a compulsive liar. He read a few lines aloud, his voice dripping with cold contempt. Then he had produced another set of documents, financial records, legal papers. He had, with the quiet efficiency of his immense power, investigated my family. He laid out the evidence of my aunt's staggering debts, accrued through years of social climbing. And then he had delivered the final, devastating blow. He had uncovered the truth of the small inheritance left to me by my parents, an inheritance my aunt and uncle, as my guardians, had sworn to protect. They had stolen it. Piece by piece, over the years, they had plundered my legacy to fund their lifestyle, to buy Clara's dresses and pay their gambling losses, leaving me a pauper dependent on their cruel charity. He called it theft, Clara choked out, wiping her eyes. And embezzlement, and fraud. He had all the proof. Father just crumpled. Alaric had then turned his attention to the proposed marriage. He informed them, in no uncertain terms, that arranging to marry me off to a man like Mr. Cole, while actively stealing from me, was not just immoral, it was criminally liable. He spoke of indenture, of coercion. He used legal terms that left them floundering and terrified. And then he had turned to me. He had given me the floor. Standing there before my tormentors, with Alaric's solid, supportive presence at my side, I had finally found my voice. I did not shout. I did not weep. I spoke with a clarity and strength that came from a place deep within me I had not known I possessed. For 10 years, I said, my voice steady, my eyes locked on my aunt's crumbling face. You have worked to make me nothing. You told me I was plain, so I would not look in a mirror. You told me I was foolish, so I would not trust my own thoughts. You told me I was a burden, so I would feel ashamed to take up space in the world. You tried to make me invisible, a gray ghost in my own home. I took a step forward, but you failed. In trying to make me invisible, you only made me a better observer. I saw your casual cruelty, your desperate ambition. I saw my uncle's weakness and my cousin's willful blindness. I saw everything. And now, for the first time, you are seeing me. My aunt had offered no defense. There was none. She had been so thoroughly exposed, her web of lies so completely unraveled, that there was nothing left. My uncle, to his credit, had finally shown a flicker of a conscience. He had begun to weep, apologizing in a broken, pathetic stream of words, admitting his failure to protect me. Alaric had ended the confrontation with a set of ultimatums. My inheritance was to be repaid in full, its value assessed by his own solicitors. They would sell their London property to do it. They would leave the county within the month and never return. The engagement to Mr. Cole was, of course, terminated. If they failed to comply with any of his terms, he would not hesitate to see them both charged and imprisoned. There was no room for negotiation. And so, my aunt had been defeated. Not by a grand battle, but by the quiet, inescapable weight of the truth. After Clara finished her story, she took my hands. I am so ashamed, Eleonora. I was so caught up in Mama's world, I never saw what was right in front of me. Can you ever forgive me? There is nothing to forgive, I told her, and again, I meant it. We were all victims of my aunt's tyranny in our own way. Later that evening, Alaric himself came to the house. He dismissed my uncle with a cold nod and asked to speak with me alone in the small, overgrown garden behind the house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in strokes of rose and gold. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and coming rain. We stood by a crumbling stone bench, a respectful distance between us, but the space felt charged with unspoken emotion. It is done, he said quietly. You are free. I don't know how to thank you, Alaric, I whispered, my heart so full it felt close to bursting. You have given me back my life. I have done nothing of the sort, he countered, turning to face me fully. His gray eyes were soft in the twilight. Your life was always your own. Your strength, your intelligence, your integrity, those are things no one could ever take from you. I simply provided a mirror so you could see them for yourself. He took a step closer, and my breath caught in my throat. I did not do this out of pity, Eleonora, nor out of a sense of justice alone. I did it because in all my solitary years, in all my echoing rooms, I have never met a mind that felt so much like a home for my own. He reached out, not for my hand, but to gently touch the place on my cheek where my aunt had struck me. His touch was feather light, but it sent a tremor through my entire being. I don't wish to save you from your life, Eleonora, he said, his voice low and rough with an emotion he could no longer conceal. I wish to be a part of the one you will now build for yourself. I have spent years surrounded by ghosts and blueprints. I want to build something real with you. My eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in my life, they were tears of profound, overwhelming joy. Marry me, Eleanora Vance, he said, his gaze holding mine, fierce and tender all at once. Marry me, and let us spend our lives in a conversation that never ends. Let us build something beautiful together. It was not a rescue. It was a proposal of partnership, of a meeting of souls. It was everything I had never even dared to dream of. Yes, I breathed, the word a prayer, a promise, a beginning. Yes, Alaric, yes. He closed the small distance between us then, and his lips met mine. The kiss was not a fiery, demanding thing. It was slow and deep and certain. It was the end of a very long winter. It was the feeling of sunlight on my face after a lifetime in the shadows. It was the feeling of being, at long last, completely and utterly seen. 1 year later, the sunlight of late autumn streamed through the tall windows of the West Wing Library, the room my mother-in-law had designed, and which I now called my own. The scent of beeswax and old paper was the same, but it was no longer a lonely smell. It was the scent of home. Blueprints were spread across the massive oak table, but they were not old ones. They were new, my own designs, for the folly on the far hill. A Grecian-style temple, a place for reading, just as she had dreamed. Alaric stood beside me, his arm warm and solid around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder as we studied the plans together. The line of the portico, he murmured, his finger tracing the curve I had drawn, is perfect. It echoes the slope of the hill itself. A conversation, I said, smiling, leaning my head back against his, not a monologue. He turned me in his arms, his gray eyes full of a deep, steady love that was now the foundation of my world. You, Duchess, are the most brilliant architect I have ever known. My family was gone. My uncle and Clara had settled in a distant city, where Clara had found work as a governess, her letters to me filled with a newfound humility and strength. My aunt, I heard, lived with them, a bitter, silent woman stripped of all her power. I felt a distant pity for her, but nothing more. She was a ghost from a life that no longer belonged to me. My own life was one of vibrant color and purpose. I was a duchess, yes, but more than that, I was Eleanora, a woman of intellect and passion, a partner, a wife, a builder of beautiful things. I was no longer a gray blur at the edge of a room. I was the heart of this home, and I was seen. I was known, and I was, finally and completely, loved.